You're listening to the True Crime Witch podcast, the podcast that takes you into everything murderous, mysterious, and downright macabre. I'm your host, Emma, and you're listening to episode 23, The West Mesa Bone Collector. Before we jump into the episode, I'd like to make a disclaimer that the True Crime Witch podcast covers topics such as rape, murder, crimes against children, and other sensitive topics. This podcast won't be for everyone, and your discretion is advised.
A local private investigator receives a chilling message from a man who claims he is the West Mesa killer.
Action 7 News reporter Will Carr listened to that voicemail and joins us now with the story.
Doug and Shelley, to this day, the West Mesa killer has never been identified or arrested. And while the murderer may still be on the streets, one local private investigator says he continues to get messages from a man who has claimed that he killed all of the women and the fetus and buried them in the desert. And the investigator just received another call last week and agreed to play that for us today.
You know who I am.
An anonymous caller left those words on the answering machine at the Final Notice Investigative Services Group several days ago.
He stated, "You know who I am." And I said, bingo.
Dr. George Walker Sr. says he immediately recognized the voice. He says the same man sent him an email and left several messages last year claiming to be the West Mesa killer. At the time, Walker was investigating the disappearance of Nina Herone, a woman who police once thought might be a West Mesa victim. She did not end up being one of the 11 women found in the desert, but to this day, Herone remains missing.
I know Nina. I know who killed her.
And so now he's trying to taunt Final Notice Investigative Services Group by telling us that he got Nina too.
Walker says he has already contacted the police department and made them aware of the message.
It only takes one tip.
On February 2nd, 2009, Christine Ross was walking her dog along the Arroyo Bank on Albuquerque's West Mesa, which is a landmass from South Albuquerque, New Mexico, that stretches north into Berrillino, New Mexico. I hope I said that right. Ross suspected that the bone didn't look like it came from an animal, which is what she would have sort of suspected for the area. Ross took a picture of the bone and sent it over to her sister, who's a nurse. Her sister replied, and much to Ross's horror, her horrific suspicions were confirmed. It was a human femur, which is a thigh bone. Ross then called it in to the Albuquerque police, and they were able to determine that the bone Ross had found was indeed human. Upon their investigation, police discovered that between 2001 and 2005, 11 women had been buried on the West Mesa by an unknown killer. Police utilised technology and did satellite scans of the area, which showed tyre tracks and plots of disturbed soil where the women had been buried. Development started on the area in 2006 with plans to turn parts of the unused West Mesa into housing complexes to house an ever-growing population. Unfortunately, due to the economic crash in 2008, the development was halted. Neighbours of the surrounding area complained that there was huge amounts of flooding due to the fact that the West Mesa was once a burial site. A developer stepped up and built a wall out of soil to help drain the water into a small pond. However, the developer didn't realise that the area of that pond was the same area where 11 women and 1 fetus had been buried. Due to water being channeled into the area, the bones were exposed to the surface and were subsequently discovered in February of 2009. The 11 victims and 1 fetus were between 15 and 32 years old, mostly Hispanic, and were involved with either drugs or sex work. All of the 11 remains have been formally identified. I'm going to quickly run through the identifications of the victims. Jamie Bolera, 15, Monica Candelera, 22, Victoria Chavez, 26, Virginia Cloven, 24, Sylvania Edwards, 15, Cinnamon Elks, 32, Doreen Marquez, 24, Julie Nito, 24, Veronica Romero, 28, Evelyn Salazar, 27, and Michelle Valdez, who was 22. Selenia Edwards, who was just 15 when she was murdered, who was the only victim who wasn't from New Mexico. She was actually the only African-American victim, as the rest of them were Hispanic. Michelle Valdez was 22 when she was murdered by the West Mesa Bone Collector. Valdez was 4 months pregnant when she went missing, and the fetus that was found is believed to have belonged to her. By December 9th, 2010, Albuquerque police released photos of 7 other Jane Does who have a possible link to the West Mesa bone collector. In the photo, some of the women are unconscious but share the same physical characteristics of the other 11 victims. Albuquerque police believe that the women were all killed and buried by the same person, or persons, who has been classified as a serial killer and is known as the West Mesa bone collector. Albuquerque police also believe that there is a large connection due to the annual state fair, which apparently is a large attraction for local sex workers. Lorenzo Montoya was considered a suspect by the police. At the time of the murders, he lived just 3 miles away from the West Mesa, and tyre tracks were found in 2006 from his trailer down to where the bodies were found. In December 2006, Montoya strangled a teenager at his trailer 3 miles away from where the women were found. However, Montoya was shot to death by the teenage girl's boyfriend, so we'll never have a confession from him. In 2014, the Albuquerque police got a break in a cold case they had been sitting on for decades. This break also led investigators to consider the suspect, Joseph Glee, in connection with the West Mesa bone collector murders. Glee was known as the mid-school rapist, as in the 1980s he would break into the homes of teenage girls between 13 and 15 who lived near McKinley Middle School before raping them. A year later, in 2015, Glee was also suspected for the murder of a sex worker who was found dead on Central Avenue, Albuquerque. His DNA was found within the victim's waistband. Police also found a tree tag from a nursery that was close to where the West Mesa girls were found. It was found out that Glee used to frequent this nursery, possibly looking for victims. I don't know why you'd look for victims in a nursery. I'm talking about the plant kind, but nevertheless. For his crimes, Joseph Glee, the mid-school rapist, was sentenced to 36 years imprisonment in June of 2015. He was 58 years old at the time of his sentencing. In 2010, a private investigator, George Walker, who worked in the Albuquerque area, started getting messages from someone claiming that they knew the identity of the West Mesa bone collector. It has even been rumoured that the emails and voicemails are actually from the killer himself. Fred Reynolds also left law enforcement scratching their heads after he passed away in 2009. Reynolds was a heroin addict, but also, quote, looked after many missing women before his death. Reynolds even looked after Doreen Marquez, whose remains were found in West Mesa. According to a friend of Marquez's, Reynolds was apparently running an escort service and employed some of the victims who went missing. Reynolds' property was searched and police found pictures of Marquez and the 10 other victims before their remains had even been found. Despite all of the possible leads, there have been no other suspects considered and still no answers. In 2010, the Albuquerque police even offered a $100,000 reward for any information that would lead to an arrest. A break in the West Mesa bone collector case will probably only come from witness testimony or DNA evidence. If you have any information regarding the West Mesa bone collector, please contact 1-877-765-8273 or you can email dmyers@cab.gov. That was this week's episode. I do apologise that it's a lot shorter than my usual episodes or what I'd usually put out. With the current situation, everything is a little bit hectic right now. I work in a hospital, so everything's a bit fucking crazy. I'm working like completely random hours, random days, and I wanted to put an episode out, so I found something that I'd sort of written a while ago, so I hope it's alright for you guys. I will be back to long episodes soon, hopefully. Remember, right now, we need to stick together, look after each other. Now is not a time for selfishness. So remember, friends, stay safe and stay spooky.